So thank you so much for joining me here today. I've got a really cute picture of myself as a baby, which I hope makes some of you laugh, which is literally the first slide. This is me. Um, so obviously, yeah, I've just had an amazing introduction from Anna, so thank you for that, Anna. But beyond sort of what Anna spoke about, I always think it's quite helpful for people to hear about other people's journey into the industry, because everyone has a slightly different journey. And for me, in the UK at least, I took quite a traditional route. So I always wanted to be a writer. I loved creative writing and reading when I was younger. And then I got to university and I became the editor-in-chief of my university magazine. I did lots of work experience during the sort of university holidays. And then I managed to get onto the Guardian's positive action scheme, which is specifically for people of colour to get their first step in, because diversity in the industry is a massive problem, which is ongoing, unfortunately. After that, I did my NCTJ, which is like a training qualification in the UK for journalists. I went into local news for a bit, so I was writing about property features, which was, I actually quite enjoyed it, but I knew that I didn't want to stay doing that long term. So I went back to university, I got my master's in journalism, and then after that, gal-dem launched at the same time, which was kind of like a, yeah, it came up alongside my freelance career. So I always had gal-dem sort of going in the background, and I was editing articles and writing articles for them on a voluntary basis while I was developing my career. In 2019, gal-dem relaunched away from this voluntary structure, and we became a business. So finally, I was able to pay myself, which was great. And we were to be able to pay everyone that we work with. And so, yeah, I've been operating as the editor-in-chief of gal-dem for about a year and a half now. And yeah, I'm just really keen today to share with everyone all the things that I've learned. I have worked for a few nationals. I worked for the FT, the Financial Times, for about 6 months. I continue to sort of work with the Guardian in a freelance capacity as a news reporter in production, writing sort of freelance articles for their features insert G2. But I also have done a huge amount of work for specialist media as well. So that's what we're here to talk about today. So yeah, first slide. First real slide that isn't just my face as a baby. So I think, you know, it might sound silly, but for me, the best stories always start with a feeling. And that it doesn't matter whether or not it's a specialist media story or not. My hunches, I always find, are usually correct. And you just got to kind of run with them. And I think the nice thing about specialist media, or if you know that this story could be pitched to a specialist media outlet, is that you can really let yourself run with it. You don't have to keep it generalistic. You can really delve deep into whatever like weird corner of the internet you might have found, whatever, like, I don't know, strange cult you've come across, and you want to explore. You can get down to the nitty gritty. The next question obviously is, are your next steps clear? This is a question I always ask myself, because I think with a good story, your next steps should always be clear, because you know what you need to do, you know what you need to find out to really bolster the story and make it into something that an editor is going to really love. It's always important to put in your prep work and conduct research as if you've already been commissioned for the piece. That's another thing that I always do, especially if I'm pitching to specialist media, because I know that the level of detail they're going to need around the topic is going to be beyond perhaps what I'd need if I was pitching to the Guardian, if I was pitching to the Times, the Telegraph. I think in the past I've gone as far as securing interviewees prior to like actually being commissioned. Not all like people will recommend doing that, but personally I found that works. And sometimes I'll like attach an interview transcript to the pitch and all that kind of stuff. It's also really important to read what's been written on the subject so far and allow for your story to change before you pitch it. Don't get too wedded to this like single idea of what the story should be. Allow yourself to go down that hole, allow yourself to really explore the topic in depth and become more interested in one part of it, even though you might have thought initially that the angle was this thing. And then once you've got this far, you should know if your topic is suited for a publication that caters to a niche or more specialist audience. It shouldn't need too much bending by this point if you've done the research, if you've done the prep. So I'm trying to think of like a good example from my history. So I once worked on a feature piece for Dazed and Confused, which was about the porn industry, something I've written about a fair amount actually, and it was to do with like some laws that were being brought in the US, which was going to make life much harder for sex workers and for those working in porn. And I sort of realised when I was researching it that I wanted to specifically focus on sex workers who are from marginalised backgrounds, and therefore I knew that that probably wouldn't be an angle that would appeal to some of the other sort of publications, or like The Guardian, which is the main publication, sort of national generalist publication that I work with. So I decided to take that to Dazed instead, and they were really open to me sort of focusing on these marginalized voices, and that was really great. That would have also been a piece that I could have pitched. I mean, I could have written for gal-dem as well, I think, because I spoke to quite a few sort of Black and other ethnic minority sex workers. And then, yeah, the final question, will you be able to answer all of the editor's questions? So just as you get ready to pitch, you want to circle back around to your research. So can you hold this piece down under scrutiny? If this editor who works the specialist publication, who perhaps knows more about the topic than you do, or knows a fair amount about it anyway, and is able to ask you these cutting questions about, which gets to the core of like what your pitch is about, are you going to be able to hold up and be like, no, this is the reason why I want to do it in this way. Here's the answer to that, you know, really factual question that you have. That's one thing I do just before I pitch as well. So the basics of pitching, I can tell from the chat that a lot of you guys, you know, are across this already, but just for those who perhaps haven't pitched as much, and just as, you know, it's a good reminder for all of us to get back to basics. When I was sort of writing this up, I was like reminding myself of some of the things that I perhaps have let become a bit shaky over the years. So we'll run through this slide super quickly. So the basics of pitching any article, and this applies to any publication, I would say, whether it's specialist or not, but I'll try and sort of hone in on some of the ways in which I think the basics of pitching can be catered to specialist media as we talk through. The first thing I always do is check the website for recent articles and for pitching guidelines. It always surprises me how much people, when they come to gal-dem, haven't read our pitching guide and haven't sort of paid attention to that, because it's literally there to help you. And with a lot of specialist media, you'll find that they actually will have pitching guides in a way that a lot of generalist media won't, because it's a small team. They really care about getting the right amount of the right style of pitches because they are niche. So, you know, publications like Bitch Media, like gal-dem, like Mel Magazine, a lot of these publications will have pitching guides if you Google them. And you can also go to websites like Journo Resources, who have a whole list of pitching guides which can be clicked through and found. Figure out what it is that you have to say that is new. Repetition is your enemy, and make sure that your take, your angle, your story is unique as it can be, and that it doesn't replicate any of the stories that already appear on this website, especially when you're pitching to specialised media. Then probably not going to want to run 3 articles on one piece of news that's come out. Whereas you could get away with that when pitching to generalist media, you can't do that for specialist media. Their budgets are very likely going to be smaller, and you know, probably the content they publish is quality over quantity. So yeah, really make sure that you're not repeating a style of article that already appears on the site or in print. Yeah, I'm just presuming that most people are going to be pitching to digital publications, but of course print has its place. It is very important. Research, research, research. Do not undervalue the research process. I've already spoken about this a little bit more, a little bit before, but it's very clear when a pitch has been poorly thought out and researched. The only time you can really get away with this is if you have a pre-existing relationship with the editor. Again, something that we'll talk about in a bit more depth as we go on. But if this is your first pitch, it's a cold pitch, the research needs to be on point and you need to have distilled that idea down to its core, and use the research to do that. Why would you be the best person to write this? Especially when it comes to specialist media, you want to think about whether or not the editor will want to commission you on this and whether you'll be able to articulate that in your pitch. So for instance, obviously at gal-dem we write a lot about race and identity. When it came to the Black Lives Matter movement this summer, it made a huge amount of sense to us to prioritise publishing Black writers. And so when we were getting pitches from people who weren't Black, we generally weren't commissioning them. And that was because we knew that the lived experience of being a Black person during the Black Lives Matter movement would lend weight to the piece in a way that if you don't share that identity, it wouldn't. So that's just one example of like thinking about whether you would be the best person to write this. And then secondly, if you know that you are the best person to write this, how are you going to capture that within your piece? Pitch rather. Just a line at the top tends to work for me. So why would the publication like this piece? Get to know the publication. It is very obvious when a pitch hasn't been tailored to a specific publication. It comes through in like a really, to me as an editor, it comes through in a really obvious way. You know, when something's been copy and pasted, and sometimes they'll use the wrong name, and sometimes I can tell that the angle won't quite work for gal-dem. Obviously some editors will put in the extra mile and they will be like, okay, this angle doesn't quite work, but could you try this angle and maybe we'll commission it. But a lot of the time they're just going to pass by your pitch because this is specialist media. This is people who are, you know, looking for pieces, pictures that are aimed at their publications in a very obvious way. Find the relevant editor. I am always shocked at the amount of people who pitch to the wrong editor when it's very easy usually to find the correct editor, especially within specialist media where there are less editors working within a publication. A lot of the time in specialist media or digital media in general, you'll have section editors. You can find them on Twitter. Often they'll post sort of like, you know, Twitter threads of things they're looking for right now. You can create a Twitter list of like all the editors that you want to pitch to, and just, you know, keep, one thing I like to do is I put alerts on people, like editors that I definitely want to pitch to in the future. And it's like, it's a bit creepy and a bit stalky, but it is effective because when they when they tweet about the types of articles that they're after, it is helpful. Getting to the actual writing of the pitch now. Give yourself a headline. I always find that really helpful. And that headline should then be turned into the subject line of your email. If you wouldn't click on it, it needs work. So again, I'm always surprised at how rubbish a lot of the subject lines that I get through are. So like if you as a person who is a journalist wouldn't click on your own headline, you aren't intrigued by that, you know, you can maybe even pass it by a friend or family member, just ask them. I'm always doing this, like, would you click on this, like, before you sort of make that your headline and the subject line of your email. Generally, I try and keep my pitches quite short and succinct. You can write a pitch of around 200, 250 words. However, there is an exception, especially when it comes to specialised media, when you are, you know, when going back to the last slide when I was talking about hunches and that feeling that you have about a piece, if you know that this is a stunning piece that only you could produce, that you have found a story that no one else has access to perhaps, or just a take that you are the only person who could produce this, you can probably stretch it a bit more. I think the max you want to go to is maybe around 500 words, but that is pretty long for a pitch. In that 200 to 250 words, you want to set out clearly what you want the article to be about. You know, you are trying to keep it succinct, but yeah, just nice and clear, accessible language, lots of sort of hyperlinks, and like ideally a little bit of evidence of your ability to write should be in there as well. you should have been thinking about the sort of format of the piece for a long time. Is it a feature? Is it an op-ed? Is it an investigation? Why have you chosen that format? Do you know that that format is published by that publication? So for instance, back in the day when Broadly, which was like a sort of subset of Vice, was around, I remember pitching to them about 3 times. I pitched op-eds and like opinion pieces to them and I was like, oh, why aren't they replying to me? Like, God, like, why don't they like these amazing ideas about feminism and that I want to write about? But I'd been lazy and I hadn't realized that Broadly didn't publish op-eds. They just didn't publish opinion pieces at that period of time. And so often, like, if you haven't thought about the format and if you haven't researched the publication properly, you'll be pitching to them these articles that they would never commission because it's just not something that they do. So yeah, don't be lazy like me. Be be rigorous. And then finally, a really good tip that I think is especially important for specialised media: reflect the language of the outlet in your pitch. So for gal-dem, for instance, we our tagline is that we're committed to telling the stories of women and non-binary people of colour. We choose that wording over BAME or like ethnic minority or like anything else. And so again, it's quite obvious when someone hasn't engaged with our content if they sort of like put in their headline like, or like in their pitch like, I want to write an article about BAME music pop stars. Because we don't use that wording, and it means something when someone is like, I want to write about people of color in this particular industry, and I'm like, okay, they're tuned in, they understand what gal-dem's about because they've reflected a bit of our language back at us. So that's another thing that I like to do. Cool. So mapping independent and specialised news media publications. So for me, I mean, I think the important thing for this is that you should have your own map, because I think that as Anna kind of spoke about my specialisms, I write around culture, I write around lifestyle, I write around race and identity and travel. And that means that my map might look very different to your map, because you will, as individuals, you all have your own niches. However, I'm going to talk through how I've mapped my kind of specialised news media publications, because this has been sort of helpful for me. So I split things into sort of like 3 categories. So we have zines. I've just got some examples of zines that I like at the moment. Zines tend to be, oh, sorry, bit of a technical difficulty there. Zines tend to be unpaid work. It's super rewarding if you have sort of space and time to do it. They tend to treat your work with extreme levels of care. They tend to be very beautiful. They have small print runs, so it feels really special when you get one. And when someone who like is a fan of the zine kind of gets hold of your work, you can get like really nice feedback. They don't tend to have a lot of advertising as well, which is great if you are sort of like politically inclined, and you just can have a lot of freedom with your work with zines. The second category is established independent. So examples I put here are Dazed, Crack. These are all sort of UK based apart from Missy Magazine, Hark Magazine, The Gentlewoman, Monocle. They're often both digital and with a small print offering, and that's mainly what we sort of focused on talking about today, because that's what I have the most experience with. And then finally, conglomerate-owned sort of niche publications such as Them, who focus on the LGBTQ plus community. You have Vice, everyone knows what a Vice article is like, a bit kind of sarky. You have Teen Vogue, who've sort of made a bit of a name for themselves with actually being quite radical in the past few years. And then you have a new publication called Zora, which is kind of like the American equivalent to gal-dem, but it's owned by Medium. So they're kind of, they have that sort of backing of like a more affluent conglomerate. These conglomerate-owned ones tend to have like higher fees, but you're going to be wanting to cater your pitches to be more in line with like mainstream publications, because they will get a lot of pitches. I think it's worth developing your understanding of the different strands of media out there, as you'll know then what to expect when heading into the pitching process. In my experience, independents can have far kinder specialised editors who'll do right by kind of sensitive stories in comparison to some of the nationals. with a lot of the nationals, as someone who writes about race and identity, I'll often be battling with like very ignorant edits, and that can be hard. But with the established independence, my experience anyway has been much more positive in terms of those sensitive, like niche stories. So now we're going to do some pitching case studies. The reason why I wanted to do this is because I think that, again, I want to encourage you guys to not be lazy when it comes to your pitching process, when it comes to specialised media. So we're going to talk through 3 different publications, and like how I might approach pitching with them and sort of figuring out like what they're about, basically. So with a lot of these publications, you kind of need to learn to read between the lines. We're starting with a publication called Mel Magazine. They're dedicated to producing original content about the topic guys care about: their bodies, their mental health, their jobs, their money, their sex lives, their relationships, their digital personas, and entertainment. Serious stuff that they intend to come across in the exact opposite way: approachable, resonant, and entertaining. So what we can kind of take from that is that Mel is a new age men's magazine. That's kind of what their shtick is. They're keen to kind of posit themselves as doing something slightly different from the norm. They're talking about serious topics in a way that doesn't feel inaccessible, that can be funny and warm and ironic. And reading through their articles, which you guys can do when you have a sec, you'll kind of quickly find that most of them have like an edge of humor, which you can kind of probably tell from their from their headlines. I grew back my foreskin and you can too. Yeah, so when looking at their headlines, it definitely has hints of Vice, but maybe slightly less salty, slightly more warm. And some articles that I might consider sort of like pitching to them would be, as you guys already know, I've written about porn before, so I might pitch around porn trends. I might pitch like an interview with like a faded cult Hollywood star who's tried to like relaunch their career as a YouTuber. I made that up, that's not a real person. But and then, before it went viral, I might have pitched them like a feature piece on interviewing frequenters of Reddit's Am I an Asshole sub? I don't know if anyone's heard about this, but it's a great subreddit. And I just have a feeling that that's the kind of stuff that Mel Magazine might be interested in. You can see from their website, obviously, that they have 6 sections. So once I had one of these ideas, around Reddit or porn or, this Hollywood star, I would, my first step would be to identify if they have section editors on, and I'd do that by going onto Twitter. So I'd look out for like, type in Mel Magazine culture editor or something like that into the Twitter search bar and see where it takes me. So yeah, that's Mel Magazine. Next one is Dazed. So obviously this is cheating a little bit because I did used to work at Dazed, but hopefully it'll be helpful for you guys. So Dazed kind of like thing is that they champion radical fashion and youth culture, defining the times of the vanguard of next generation writers, stylists, and image makers. So Dazed began as a fashion magazine, and I'd sort of argue that you can tell quite quickly from clicking on their website that aesthetic is still at the heart of everything that they do. They care about beautiful young people, what they're doing, their politics and their art, and they're always looking for the next bright new thing, shiny thing to sort of focus upon. Internally, you can see from their website that they lean quite heavily on news content, but for freelancers, you're looking at a mixture of sort of interview features, Q&As, and op-eds and analysis. Dazed really prides itself on being witty. It's open to pictures about more sort of niche art, photography, and film that you're interested in, as long as it has a really like good aesthetic edge, which aligns with their own. Until very recently, so if you look at the left-hand side, obviously they break things down into news, fashion, music, art, photography, film, TV, science, tech, life and culture, and politics. That's actually a bit misleading because they've never had section editors for each of those, and I think actually they've got rid of their section editors entirely now. I know that because I did some stalking on Twitter before coming on to present to you guys. So again, the power of Twitter. I can't overstate it. It's really important. You can find their current editors on Twitter and pitch out to them that way. Just from going off some of their recent headlines, some articles that I might consider pitching to them at the moment would be around youth activism in the American election. I might pitch to them a cultural analysis on why there are so many period dramas featuring Black people at the moment. And I might pitch to them an interview with an artist who's doing a 3D virtual exhibition that looks genuinely cool. Again, I hope that was helpful, sort of breaking down. And then finally, gal-dem. This is fully cheating on my part, obviously, because I am the editor-in-chief. But, you know, again, might be helpful for anyone who wants to pitch us in future. So gal-dem is a new media publication, and our aim is that we are committed to telling the stories of women and non-binary people of colour. People come to gal-dem for stories and perspectives they cannot find elsewhere, and we tell people-focused stories which represent the diversity of the human experience and seek out unheard voices. We are one of the media publications that has a pitching guide, so pitching to us should be super simple. But if you were just sort of approaching us via our website, you can see quite clearly that we have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7 sections. With the exception of horoscopes and news, they all have section editors. So again, everyone's on Twitter, you can find them. We also have a team page on our website. In terms of the types of articles that gal-dem tends to publish, we're probably best known for our op-ed content. So but op-ed content with like a particular edge around identity. So a recent example of a great article that kind of captures what we're about was, as a Kazakh or its satire, feels like it punches down harder than it hits those at the top. This was a good piece for us because it actually gave a voice to people from Kazakhstan. A lot of the pieces that we saw around Borat were written, you know, the Borat 2, were written by people who weren't actually from the country. Whereas this piece for us was good because we were like, you know, we're giving it that voice to a perspective that people can't find elsewhere at the moment. And yeah, it was really lovely to be able to publish that. At the moment, we're also really interested in investigations. So one of our sort of best performing pieces this year was around the death of a young girl called Shukri Abdi. And she drowned really sadly in a river in Manchester, Greater Manchester, and we were able to do an investigation which centred around the inquest into her death. No one else in the UK sort of news media landscape had sort of done an in-depth piece of reporting around Shukri Abdi, and this piece had an immense amount of impact, and that's what we're really looking for, because we know at gal-dem that the stories of women and non-binary people of colour, that the stories of Black women, you know, and Black girls in particular in this case, do not get the type of attention that they need. So yeah, again, a really good piece for us. And then finally, how to sustainably grow your own food without a garden. So this piece came about because during lockdown, we figured out that that a lot of people of colour in the UK don't have access to gardens. We knew that a lot of people, you know, were trying to find new hobbies during lockdown. We're trying to like just do something to distract themselves, and so we wanted to sort of support our community and almost create like a resource piece. So that's another thing that we kind of specialise in. So my voice is getting hoarse, so we're going to move on to an exercise for you guys. So the lovely girls are going to pop in 3 news stories into the chat for you guys to have a read of. I want you to read through these news stories and then come up with a headline and a 100-word pitch that would sit in one of the 3 magazines that we've just discussed below. I want these pitches to be super ambitious. So like, you know, obviously like you can't know this off the bat, but is there someone that you've sort of seen around who you think that you could interview in relation to one of these news stories? Is there like an op-ed piece that you've been burning to write that's quite personal, that you think that would sit really well in one of these publications and relates to the news stories that that we're going to send? I think we'll have maybe about 10 minutes doing this exercise, maybe 15, and then we'll come back and I might ask a couple of people to share their pictures. Okay, so we've not got that much time, so I'm going to move on now to talking you through some of my pictures that I've pitched over the years, and I'm going to start sharing my screen again. So this is like another semi-exercise, or maybe just a bit of fun for you guys. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go through these slides quite slowly, and I want you to read through these pictures. These are genuine pictures that I sent out to various publications. And I would love for you to sort of pop into the chat box which of these you think got commissioned and which didn't. So this is the first one. Why is everyone on Tinder obsessed with my race? And I pitched this to Vice. I'll let you guys read through it. Okay, I'm going to move on now. Slightly longer one here. This one was to Easyjet Traveller magazine. That's a like in-flight magazine on Easyjet, which is like a airline in the UK. I think it goes to most European countries, so hopefully everyone will know it. So apologies for any Italians in here, because I probably spelled something wrong or have misrepresented Peachy in some way. Okay, and the final pitch here. This one was the Evening Standard magazine, which is like a local London newspaper, but it's like quite big within London, if that makes sense. So it's like it's kind of more in line with the nationals than you might think, for compared to like most papers that are local.
I saw that in two of your pitches, you included your personal experiences. So I'm wondering if one of these two pitches was the one that got commissioned.
Yes, well, I will talk through that in a minute. So that's the three pitches. Could everyone just pop into the pop into the chat whether or not they think pitch number 1, pitch number 2, or pitch number 3 was the one that got commissioned? Oh, interesting. Lots of different answers. I'm glad you guys have faith in me.
I think, yeah, we have people that go for all the options.
Yeah. Okay. All right. So I'm going to tell you the answer now. So the pitches that got commissioned were pitch number 1 and pitch number 2. And I'm going to talk through why. The first one was it's obviously from ages ago, so it was from 2015. It was the first piece that I ever pitched. It was a cold pitch, so I like didn't have any contacts at the publication. I was, to be honest, I was absolutely shocked that it got commissioned, but there was a few things within it that I did well right from the very beginning. And the first thing was that I identified a story that no one had written about before. So this was like kind of when Tinder was new, and also when we didn't see quite as many stories around race and identity as we do now in the media. So yeah, it was super short. But I'd pre-written the article, which is not something I recommend because they made me rewrite it like 3 times. but it was punchy, and it was definitely, you know, very much aimed at Vice. Like, I knew that this was a story that Vice would like. I used the word obsessed in the sort of like headline of it, because I was like, obsessed, that's a word that Dazed will find like, you know, funny or like pithy or whatever. I did that very sort of basic thing of like putting pitch at the beginning of the email thread, which is something that, you know, people don't always do, and it's just like a very simple thing that you can do to make sure that editors know what it is. I also included screenshots of some of the messages that I'd been sent that kind of like backed up my point. Like, it wasn't just that I was telling the editors that this is, you know, that's something that happens to me. I was showing them as well, which I think is a good thing to do. So yeah, that was my first ever piece that got commissioned. Unsurprisingly, I think most people said they thought it was pitch 2 that got commissioned. This also, yes, did get commissioned. This pitch kind of breaks some of the rules that I spoke about earlier, so it's very long, but I had a hunch, and I really, really felt passionately about this, and I'd done sorry, I probably shouldn't swear. I'd done a lot of research on this. I'd become obsessed with this type of pasta after I'd had it in a restaurant in London, and when I say obsessed, I mean like I spent hours like Googling it, trying to find recipes as to how to make it myself. And I feel like that passion for it really comes through. And then I also got lucky because in my research, I managed to find this this festival that happened once a year that no one had ever reported on before, apart from Italian publications. And it also happened to be the 50th year of this festival. So it just, everything came together, and I just was like, okay, I'm going to pitch this really ambitious, you know, the first ever like proper travel pitch, and I'm going to try and get this publication to send me out to this this festival. And I pitched it to both High Life, who I mentioned in the first line, and to Easyjet Traveller. High Life didn't go for it in the end because it wasn't close enough to one of their flight routes, but Easyjet did because it was close enough to one of theirs. I think the other good thing about this pitch is that I really broke down like elements that I knew would be of particular interest to the publication. So I know that for Easyjet, they're always thinking about the region, because like they want people to fly to these places. So I broke down, you know, had a section about the region. I also made it very clear as to why now, you know, why people should be flying out now. It's the 50th year of the festival. And in the UK, there's been a huge uptick in interest in Peachy, thanks to this new restaurant, and also Jamie Oliver's got this recipe and all this kind of stuff. And I've also tried to make it as easy as possible for the editor. You know, I'm bringing my Italian speaking friend, so there's no issues with translation and blah, blah, blah. So yeah, that was so much fun. It was like one of the best pieces I've sort of managed to put together. And then let me tell you why this next pitch did not get commissioned. So I think the pitch itself is not awful. It's like, it's pretty good. But the issue with it ultimately came down to the fact that I was trying to pitch a, like, you know, quite a serious topic to a feature section of a publication who doesn't really do serious. So I'd like to write a feature exploring the benefits of having an Afro hair hub in London while investigating whether or not it's likely to succeed, despite these hairdressers losing the natural footfall of customers near the station. I'm planning to frame the piece around getting my hair braided on the 12th of January. And so what they came back to me saying, it wasn't a flat out no, but what they came back to me saying is that they would want me to revolve the piece entirely around getting my hair done, and I didn't want to do that. And so we had this back and forth, and eventually it got spiked. And that was down to my lack of research of the publication. I should have spent much longer reading their features and getting a sense of the types of articles that they would be interested in before I sent this pitch. And I ended up wasting so much time with this back and forth on them that I wasn't able to get it commissioned elsewhere. So that's a word of warning for you guys. Cool. So just to wrap up, I'm going to do some final tips. So avoiding bad pitching etiquette is real important. Don't send the exact same pitch to different publications. It's sloppy and obvious. Don't put the whole article on the pitch. Sometimes freelancers will do this, and especially for specialised media, it's not a good shout, because, you know, as an editor, I want to help to push this piece into like the direction that I see it fitting best for the publication that I have a better understanding of than perhaps you will as the pitcher. Unless the piece is extremely time sensitive, don't chase it for a few days. Better to decide on, instead sort of pitch it elsewhere, but like think carefully, as I've said before, research the publications that you're pitching to, make sure that the pitch is tailored. Figure out your maximum and minimum rates for indie publications ahead of time. So better to decide on these ahead of time before sort of like umming and ahhing over email. Because yeah, their rates for specialist media might be slightly lower. But actually also, you know, in comparison, they might be slightly higher depending on where you're pitching to. It just depends on the backing of the publication. Cool. And then extending your network of commissioning editors. The most important thing for me has been Twitter. Even if you're shy or an introvert, as a freelancer, you should always be actively looking to extend your network of commissioning editors. On Twitter, you can create groups. It's the best platform for finding editors. Pretty much every single commissioning editor is on Twitter. With peer-to-peer connections, do not be afraid of asking for hookups. If you see a mutual working with an editor who you want to work with, ask them to introduce you. It might be the only way that you can kind of get in contact with them. In usual time, events are good. You know, do go to these dry journalism conferences, attend talks, keep tabs on people. Go up to them, be brave, ask for a moment of their time. I've personally made some really brilliant connections by doing this. I am naturally very shy, but I kind of force myself while blushing to go up and approach these editors who I'm kind of in awe of. It's always worth it. There are some great newsletters out there for freelance journalists, which I hope a lot of you are aware of already, including Freelance Pitch Calls by Hattie Gladwell. There is obviously the classic Sean Meads Williams freelance writing jobs newsletter. I'll pop these into the chat in a minute. And Journo Resources, especially for journalists in the UK, is brilliant as well. Instagram, interestingly, is really great for finding niche publications and zines. You'll find so many of them by just going on a follow spree or just like typing like zine into Instagram and seeing what pops up. Magazine shops, again, are like in normal times, if it wasn't COVID, like a really great way to find niche publications. You know, you guys should really care about these print publications and about these niche publications and want to buy them and consume them, even if you're not necessarily writing for them all the time. I try and keep a sort of eye on what's happening in the wider industry because it helps me as an editor, but it also helps me as a freelancer as well. And then finally, LinkedIn and the dots are kind of like last resort, for me, last resort places for hookups and expanding networks. They might be slightly more useful for like copywriting work, but they're kind of semi-useful for finding specialist media commissioning editors too. Final top tips. When pitching and working with specialist media, be respectful. Sometimes I get the sense that because you know, we're a smaller publication, people don't necessarily always respect editors' time or like expertise as much as they do with generalist editors. It doesn't matter who you're pitching to or who you're working with, you should have the same level of respect. You should be turning in your copy on time and just like trying to maintain that relationship. Obviously, on the flip side, don't take shit. Like you should be treated with respect as well, and you can always pull out of the commissioning and editing process if that's what you want to do. But obviously, I don't think I've ever done that, to be honest. Yeah, but you know, most people in the industry are good and they're doing it for the right reasons. Treat edits as a discussion. Try not to be too precious, especially if it's like a topic that is close to your heart. I can understand why you would want to push back, but do so in a way that, again, is respectful. Treat it as a discussion. If you're worried about how someone is editing your work, see if you can get them on the phone or on a Zoom or whatnot. Especially for specialist media that might have a smaller reach than the bigger generalist platforms. If you can, ask them to include a bio at the end of the article. I think that's like a nice thing to do. Just like a line, which is like, you know, Charlie Brinkhurst-Cuff is an editor of X and X, and you can find her on Twitter here and the link. sharing your published work and tagging them on social media will mean everything to a lot of specialist media. They, you know, as I've already said, they do tend to be a bit smaller. So, you know, every share counts, and they'll love it if you tag them. And then finally, follow up. Like, a lot of this industry is about relationship building. And I think, you know, once I've worked with someone and had a positive experience with them, I'm way more likely to commission them again, and also think about them for commissions. I have reached a stage in my career now, very happily, where I barely have to pitch, which is which sounds kind of like, you know, bleh, but like it, you know, I have a lot of people who come to me, and that means that often I don't have to pitch as often unless I feel very passionate about a topic. And I feel like, you know, with the right amount of work, the right levels of work, and the right amount of relationship building, you guys can get to that point too. And then finally, questions. That's it.
Thank you, Charlie. So I think we have a list of very interesting questions. So Stella, if you want to start.
Yes, I think we are running a bit short on time, but we can try to get through as many of your questions as possible. So I will try to talk fast. The first set of questions is relating to working in advance. First, Evelina is asking, how can I pitch a story before investing all the time and making sure it is going to be commissioned? And Yelena is asking very similarly, especially when pitching very niche topics that might just fit for one specialized media, how do you deal with doing a lot of work in advance before pitching, and then it might get declined and you don't get paid for the work at all? Do you have any tips on that?
Yeah, I mean, it is really hard because sometimes you will put in a lot of work and something just won't pan out. But I mean, I set limits for myself in that, like, I personally, you know, I might secure 1 or 2 interviewees, but I wouldn't secure 6. And I wouldn't actually necessarily do the interviews with them. I just say, would you be available in the next couple of weeks to talk to me about X thing? And then it kind of, again, for me, goes back to this thing of like hunches. Like, I would say, apart from at the very beginning of my career, I'd say probably about 90% of the pitches that I've sent out have ultimately been commissioned. And that's because, like, again, I'm not trying to sort of sound arrogant or anything like that, but I have a lot of faith in the ideas that I have, and I know those ideas are good, and I'm not flippant with them. And you can usually tell within yourself whether or not an idea is strong, and whether or not it's going to, you know, and it's going to pique the interest of an editor. If you're feeling unsure about it, don't put in the same level of work. Pitch it perhaps with a little bit less research. If you feel very strongly about something, like I did about that ridiculous peachy pasta pitch, then you can go in, like, you know, I'd put in such a like, you know, it's not necessarily shown from that, you know, 500-word pitch, but I'd put in an insane amount of research into that already before I got to the point of pitching it, because I knew that someone somewhere would care about it as much as I did. So yeah.
Okay, that's great. That's great to keep in the back of the mind. I will move on very fast to the next one from Laura. Do you have any tips or experience of forging relationships with editors from specialist publications to move from a cold pitch to a slightly warmer one?
So it's hard, isn't it? Because this period of time is bizarre due to COVID, and, like, to be honest, like the way in which I've done this in the past has generally been through, can we grab a coffee? I've met someone at an event and, like, you know, like, convinced them that I'm worth talking to, and gone that route. However, you know, one thing I do like to do is, and I do this still to this day, actually, with like relative frequency, with people whose work I really care about, you know, editors and writers whose work I really care about. Sometimes I'll drop them, and, you know, we might follow each other on Twitter or whatnot. Sometimes I'll drop them like a line when I've written an article that I know that they're going to be really interested in. So, like, the other day I sent like an article. I hadn't written this one, but I edited it. I sent an article to like a journalist who I'm like a huge fan of, who's a Guardian journalist called Nazreen Malik. And I just dropped her a line being like, hey Nazreen, like, I just published this article. I know that this is a topic that you're interested in. Hope you're keeping really well. And just those little small bits of interaction can really build up a relationship, even in the virtual space. But you know, you've got to use your common sense. Like if someone's like airing all of your emails, like don't pursue it. But if there's someone else within the space who is being a bit more receptive to you and like responsive, obviously don't go into overkill, but like work on that, like figure out what it is that they want to see from you. See if they are available for a Zoom to talk about what they're commissioning at the moment. Ask them what they're commissioning at the moment, you know, and what types of pieces that they tend to always struggle to look for writers to cover.
That's a great answer. And I think, yeah, especially now in the COVID times, it's pretty hard. Also, Evelina just wrote that she's really good at networking, but yeah, during COVID times, not so much. But there's a very quick question, but that might be interesting, is about submission forms. Daiva is asking, when a publication has a submission form, is it best to use that, or would you still seek like a personal connection by contacting the relevant editor by email?
Really hard. I think if you've worked with the editor before, then it's a good idea to email them. However, it is worth checking with them in that email. Like, you know, what I might do, for instance, and what I appreciate people doing is like, hey Charlie, like, you know, we've worked together before on this thing before, here's my pitch. I'm aware that you currently take pitches through this form. If I don't hear back from you in the next like couple of days, I'll resubmit it through the form. And that means that I don't have to respond if I don't want to, basically. But if you don't know them, oh, it's so hard. It just does vary every editor. I don't want to give a blanket response because it's different for every person. There's no real harm in sending an email, but maybe it's worth doing both. I think is the ultimate answer to that.
Yeah, always also case by case. Anna, how are we looking in terms of time? Do we have time for another question, or should we wrap?
Charlie, what do you think? Because I saw we have a couple of interesting questions. I think we have.
I can try and answer a couple more. Yeah.
Okay.
I'll talk quickly.
Okay, great. So there's another question that is also from Daiva, which is about how do you tell your interviewees if a story is not yet commissioned, but you have already booked their time, but without any certainty of when is it coming out, that it is coming out at all, and also where it is coming out, and that maybe you have to tell people that hope that they would get into The Guardian and they got excited, and in the end you have to kind of disappoint them. How do you deal with that side, like with the sources, interviewees in the pitching process?
Completely honest, completely transparent. There's absolutely no point in like being like, I'm so sure this is going to get into The Guardian or whatnot when you're not sure. So like I had it just the other day where I wrote a piece for someone and I interviewed about like 10 people, which is slightly too many people to be fair, and I had to sort of message about 5 of them being like, I'm really sorry that I know that I interviewed you on the basis of including you in this Cosmo piece, but unfortunately the editors decided to cut your interviews. But the thing I did beforehand, which is so important, is that I'd set the parameters for that at the beginning of the interview. So when I did the reach out, I was like, hey X person, I'm doing this piece for this publication, this is what you should expect from the interview. However, I want to let you know that they might not include you. Like, and I put that right at the beginning, and they were happy. All of these people were happy to be interviewed on that basis. Obviously, every now and then you're going to get a source who's going to be really angry with you or upset or whatnot, but there's nothing much you can do about that, and it is just unfortunately something that happens. So yeah.
So transparency is key. I mean, it's also outside of your control. There's another question from Kinita, and I'm not sure if it's opening too big one, you have to tell me, but her question or his question is, where do you draw the line as a journalist writing about issues to decide like, this isn't my story to tell? Is it wrong to pitch an article about a marginalized community that you don't directly belong to?
No, I think that's a brilliant question, and one that I'm always sort of grappling with myself as well. I think it's fine to pitch an article about a marginalised community that you don't belong to if, yeah, it is hard to answer. If you truly believe that you are the best person to be telling that story and that no one else will tell it in the way that you are, and also that you are going to put in the requisite research and be sensitive enough to not, you know, re-traumatize anyone, to not ask them stupid questions. I think that's the really crucial thing. But yeah, there's definitely no blanket no on this. I don't believe that that's the case. I think as journalists we should, you know, be able to report on many different things.